Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Corman Productions, here to talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Season 6, Episode 13, Far Beyond the Stars. The episode's description reads as follows. Captain Sisko has a full sensory vision of himself as an underappreciated science fiction magazine writer in 1950s America. The episode was directed by series star Avery Brooks, who directed 9 episodes throughout the series. This is his second to last effort. The teleplay was written by Hans Beamer and Ira Stephen Bear, with a story by credit given to Mark Scott Zicree. The writing of Deep Space Nine was typically a team effort. The episode originally aired on February 11th, 1998. Before going any further, I'll tell you a couple of things. 1. This is not a sport-free podcast, so if you haven't watched the episode, please go and check it out, and then come back and give me a listen. Secondly, if you are on one of the platforms that this is now listenable, please hit me up with a follow. You can also head over to my YouTube channel, Corman Productions, where additional content can be discovered. If you are already on my YouTube channel, please hit me up with a like, share, and comment, and please subscribe to my channel. Okay, so if you're a regular fan of my channel, you'll note that this is the very first Deep Space Nine episode that I've covered on this channel, and actually one of the very few Star Trek episodes that I've done on this channel. I'm not ruling out eventually covering the series in total, but for now the question is, why am I starting with this random episode in this 6th season? As you may or may not be aware, February is Black History Month, and I've chosen to celebrate this in a variety of ways, including some mental health shorts related to the mental health in the Black community. This episode happens to tackle the subject of racism and is probably top 10 on a lot of people's lists best episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. In fact, it's probably one of the best episodes in the entire franchise, at least according to some people. And for added irony, it also aired during Black History Month, which is something that Ronald D. Moore, one of the writers on the series, says was just a happy coincidence. I was almost going to have it drop this video on the exact date it aired, but that was a Saturday, and my YouTube content tends to perform badly on weekends, so I felt there was not really a good reason to do that. I had some other options for what I was potentially going to do, including taking a look at the Spike Lee film Malcolm X, and American History X, which, amusingly enough, also happens to feature Brooks in a supporting role. But ultimately, I decided to go with this episode. Since this is my first look at the series, I'll start off by giving some background on what actually happens to be one of my favorite Trek series. Star Trek The Next Generation was perhaps my first love, but Deep Space Nine was the more ambitious series, with probably the best cast of all the Trek series. Sorry, Patrick Stewart, but don't worry, you remain one of my all-time heroes. Star Trek Deep Space Nine was the first series to not take place on a starship named Enterprise, and was the first series to feature a black captain in Captain Sisko, played by Avery Brooks, who, to put it mildly, is an interesting actor. And I should point out that initially when the series began, he was not a captain, he was in fact a commander. He didn't get promoted to captain until the Season 3 finale. When the series first started, while I liked the character of Sisko and the actor Avery Brooks, he for the most part came off as a bland cipher. Now there were exceptions to this. For instance, when he was acting against his on-screen son, Jake Sisko, played by Sirach Lofton. The dynamic between the two of them was a joy to watch right from the start of the series. The other exception is when he was chewing people out. Nobody chews a crew member out like Captain Sisko. He didn't really become one of my favorite captains until Season 4, once he shaved his head, though it started in Season 3 when the series got the Defiant ship and the beginning of the Dominion arc. Brooks has an interesting ability to both underact and overact at the same time. I think for the first couple of seasons, he really wasn't comfortable with his character, but found his groove as the series went along. I think part of this comes down to his hair. Usually, like in the past, for instance, he had his head shaved. And for Captain Sisko, the producers wanted him to have hair. It wasn't until he shaved that head that I think he got really comfortable playing the role. Even after that, he still had some interesting performance choices here and there. Brooks only has 21 acting credits to his name, spending much of his time in theater, and last I heard he was actually teaching acting classes. The role he was most known for, other than Captain Sisko, was Hawk in the Spencer for Hire series, its subsequent TV movies, and eventually his own Hawk series that lasted for 13 episodes. If you want to see the best example of his weird acting choices, check out the movie The Big Hit with Mark Wahlberg. Warning, it's not a very good movie, but it still has some entertaining moments thanks to Brooks himself. I've already mentioned American History X, and he has some weird line deliveries in that one as well, though that one is a substantially better film with Edward Norton that maybe I'll take a look at Corman production style in the future, but man, is that a brutal film. The premise of the series was that Sisko, who was a commander at the time, after his wife died thanks to Locutus, Captain Picard having been assimilated by the Borg some years earlier, was being sent to run a space station orbiting Bajor that the Cardassians recently abandoned after ending their occupation of the Bajorans. The space station's name is the same as the series, Deep Space Nine. Both of those species, the Bajorans and the Cardassians, were introduced in Star Trek The Next Generation. Sisko's job is to help heal the planet and get them ready to join the Federation. Some of the early seasons dealt more with the politics of Bajor, which as the series progressed became less and less the focus, as the series started to leaning more and more into the Dominion and the Federation's war with them. The episode we are taking a look at today was mid-season 6, Deep into the Dominion War arc. The episode gave many of its cast a chance to act in different roles than their typical roles in a series, and sans makeup. The characters of Odo, Quark, and Miles O'Brien do not appear in this episode, but the actors that portray them do, and some of the actors get more interesting material to work with than others. Amusing to note that there is actually some crossover with a series that I regularly cover in Quantum Leap. There are some actors that appear in both this episode and that series, and I'll discuss that as we go along. This episode was nominated for 3 Emmy Awards: Outstanding Art Direction, Outstanding Costume Design, which was Robert Blackman, and Outstanding Hairstyling for a series. According to Memory Alpha, everyone involved with this episode felt that Avery Brooks gave an Emmy-winning performance, and there was a heavy disappointment amongst the crew and the cast that he was not nominated at all. The working title of this episode was The Cold and Distant Stars, which was pretty close to the working title used for Past Tense Part 1, a Season 3 episode. The original pitch from writer Mark Scott Zicree was focused on Jake Sisko, and instead of experiencing a vision, Jake went back in time to the 1950s. However, the conclusion of that episode was that he never actually traveled in time and was being tricked by an alien. I'm thinking I prefer the version the episode ultimately gave us over that. The episode begins with Captain Sisko in his office with Major Kira Nerys, Sisko's Bajoran first officer played by Nana Visitor, who has 74 acting credits and recently reprised her role of Kira in Star Trek Lower Decks. She's telling him a destroyed starship, the Cortez, that was destroyed at the hands of the Dominion. Actually, I believe it was the Cardassians that ended up blowing that ship up. The Defiant was out looking for survivors, and they found none. Sisko is distraught because he knew the captain, Captain Swafford, for a long time. Sisko emotionally and angrily tells Kira that he introduced Swafford to his wife. The Cortez was patrolling the Cardassian border, which has become more and more hazardous thanks to the war. This was well after the Cardassians joined the Dominion, and after the 6-part arc where they had taken over Deep Space Nine. Sisko says that they all felt the war was over after they reclaimed the station. Kira points out that she never believed that, and neither did Sisko. A lot of good that did the people of the Cortez, Sisko hisses in a slightly weird delivery by Brooks. Wouldn't be any fun if I didn't point out that every once in a while. I would love to see William Shatner and Brooks play a scene together, as Shatner of the original series had an interesting acting style that many have mimicked and made fun of over the years. In comes Sisko's father, visiting the station from Earth for the first time, played by the legendary Brock Peters. He had 132 acting credits, including the 1962 Gregory Peck film To Kill a Mockingbird. He had 2 appearances as Admiral Cartwright in Star Trek IV and Star Trek VI, where he was revealed to be a traitor. He has 6 appearances on this series, and sadly he passed away on August 23, 2005, at the age of 78. Sisko reveals the depth of his pain when he reveals that he doesn't know how much more he can take, losing so many friends in the war. He thinks that perhaps he should step down and let someone else take the tough calls. His father tells him that he'll support whatever decision he makes, but if Captain Swafford were around, he thinks he would have a thing or two to say to Ben right now. Yeah, but he's not here, and that's the whole point, Sisko says. His dad tells him that he has some thinking to do, and while he does that, he has a dinner invitation with his grandson, Jake, played by Sirach Lofton. Right at that moment, Sisko sees an unidentified man standing outside his office who looks a bit like Odo, though more human and in different clothing. Sisko, spooked, leaves his office into ops, but the man isn't there anymore. Sisko asks his crew, which consists of Dax, played by Terry Farrell, and of course Kira, and neither one of them have seen this man that Sisko is thinking he saw. Cut to a scene with Sisko and his girlfriend Cassidy Yates. She's played by Penny Johnson Harold, who would go on to have roles in 24, Castle, and more recently, Orville, the Star Trek-like show, which had plenty of other Star Trek actors appear at one point or another. This is actually her first appearance in this season because of her work on the Larry Sanders Show. She only has one other appearance this season in the penultimate episode of Season 6, The Sound of Her Voice. Sisko is worried about her being so close to the border and getting killed by the Dominion. Yates isn't really indulging him, saying she's fearless and that she isn't worried, and that is why Sisko loves her. Sisko tells her he thinks he can follow that logic. Right at that moment, he sees another figure walking down the corridor, this one dressed in a baseball uniform, calling out to him, specifically calling him Benny, and asking if he caught the game. This hallucination is played by Michael Dorn, who is Commander Worf in the series. He originated on Star Trek The Next Generation and joined the cast of DS9 in the show's 4th season. In addition to that, he appeared in Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country as a relative of Worf's, and all 4 of the TNG movies, and he will appear in Season 3, the last of Star Trek Picard. All told, he has 182 acting credits. I'm always surprised that Dorn didn't have a more famous career, as he has charisma to burn, which he gets to demonstrate in this episode. And he does not appear as Worf in this episode. Sisko looks confused, and Cassidy doesn't see anyone. The person opens a door and leaves. Sisko follows and finds himself on the streets of Earth, in what looks to be the distant past, the 1950s to be exact. It isn't long before he's hit by a taxi and is knocked unconscious. He awakes in sickbay with Dr. Bashir, Cassidy, Jake, and Sisko's father. Dr. Bashir is played by Alexander Siddig, which is not his real name. He changed it at some point in the credits to a stage name, thinking that it would help his career. He's done okay for himself, having 62 acting appearances and still going. Dr. Bashir tells him that he has unusual neural patterns similar to last year. He's referencing the fantastic episode Rapture, in which he started having visions thanks to the prophets, or wormhole aliens if you prefer, after an accident. To save his life, he needed surgery, which Sisko did not want because he believed the visions to be important, even at the cost of his own life. But his son, while Sisko was in a coma, had the doctor do it anyway. Cassidy asks if he will need surgery again. Bashir doesn't know, but he hands Sisko a pad, which turns into a magazine, and I believe that's the Galaxy that is so often referenced throughout the episode. Sisko is in the past again, fully submerged in the Benny Russell character. The person running the stand asks him if he's going to buy that or not. He's played by Aaron Eisenberg, and he played Nog in this series. He's a character who starts off as a troublemaking Ferengi kid and ends the series as a responsible Starfleet lieutenant. Eisenberg sadly died on September 21st, 2019, at the age of 50. In a podcast which Sirach Lofton and him did together, The Seventh Rule, it was revealed that Eisenberg was disappointed that he never quite had a regular role post DS9. In a bit of irony, his character is not a fan of science fiction. I believe this is his only appearance in this episode. He's soon joined by Albert, played by Cole Meany, who plays Chief O'Brien in this series, and also was a character that was a regular character on Star Trek The Next Generation. He was often seen in the transporter room and occasionally got a spotlight episode here and there, before transferring over to Deep Space Nine sometime during the TNG's 6th season. Albert has a bit of a stuttering problem, but he and Benny walk to the office where they work as science fiction writers. And credits! I'm quite long into this, and I'm only now getting to the opening credits. This is definitely going to be a long podcast. After the credits, we see the office where Benny has yet to arrive, which is kind of weird since this is Cisco's hallucination or message from the prophets or whatever. We got new characters for the rest of the main cast, including the late Rene Auberjonois. And by the way, I did not know how to pronounce that last name. I had to listen to a YouTube recording for quite some time and practice that last name before I was able to pronounce it, even close to what it actually is supposed to be. And hopefully I got it right. As Rene Auberjonois is playing Douglas Pabst, the editor of the magazine, and he typically plays Odo in the series. He is the one Cisco saw outside of his office at the beginning of the episode. Auberjonois unfortunately died in 2019 on December 8th at the age of 79. Of the main cast, he probably has the most meaty role in this episode. Also, there is Nana Visitor, who is now Kay Eaton, and Alexander Siddig as Julius Eaton. Those two are married, as it turns out, and that's a little in-joke because the two of these actors were actually married in real life. Armin Sherman, who plays Quark in this series, generally speaking, who also happens to be an uncle to Nog, is playing Herbert. Armin Sherman actually originated the Ferengi species in the first season episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, The Last Outpost. He had one other appearance in that series, actually as Quark this time. In addition to that, he also had an appearance in the first ever episode of Star Trek Voyager, also as Quark. Genre fans would recognize him as having been in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He had a couple appearances on a show that I watched and was very short-lived in the 2000 series The Invisible Man. He is currently complaining to Pabst about the stale donuts, to the point where he's ready to quit and go join another magazine. Kay Eaton in this episode is forced to use her initials for writing credits to hide her gender, which according to Internet Movie Database trivia is a reference to the original series writer D.C. Fontana, who was actually named Dorothy Catherine, having to do the same thing. This is when Benny and Albert join the scene. Pabst eventually promises him fresh donuts, and that is enough to keep her from quitting. Pabst calls in Ritterhouse to hand out the assignments. He's an artist that has pictures to give to the writers. Ritterhouse is played by J.G. Hetzler, who I am extremely happy to be talking about again. He appeared on a Quantum Leap episode, Sea Bride, which I covered on this channel, and was one of the highlights of that episode for me, mostly because of his role on this series, where he played multiple different characters. He was a captain who died at the hands of the Borg in the series premiere. He was also Martok, both the Changeling version and the actual Martok who became a regular on the series. And of course a Changeling in the show's 7th season who had not yet found his way home to his people. He has an appearance on Star Trek Voyager, 2 appearances on Star Trek Enterprise, 3 appearances on Star Trek Lower Decks, one of which he reprises the role of Martok. He is very, very recognizable by voice, if nothing else. He hands out the first drawing, which Kay and Julius take. The second picture was taken by Herbert. The next is a space station which resembles Deep Space Nine, that draws Benny's interest. Curiously, I don't think Albert ends up with anything. The next item on the agenda is that the readers want a picture so that they can figure out what these guys look like. Pabst tells Kay that she can sleep in that day because this is the 1950s and they can't know that Kay is a woman. The same reason she is forced to use her initials to credit her writing. This makes her low-key mad, but she takes it in stride. Benny quietly says that he supposes he can sleep in that day as well, being a black man and all. And Pabst says, "It's not personal, Benny, but as far as the readers are concerned, Benny Russell is as white as they are, and let's keep it that way." Pabst says this, and we are introduced to the episode's central dilemma, or conflict, if you will. Not the picture per se, but this and 1,000 other things. Herb pops in with sarcasm, speaking up on his behalf as he will throughout the episode. And mind you, he is the only one who ever really says anything. Benny quietly starts naming off some black writers and brings up the book Native Son, which is really funny because in American History X, Brooks plays a principal who once assigned Native Son as a book in one of his classes. Native Son was a novel written by Richard Wright, first published on March 1st, 1940, and the book's description reads as follows. It tells the story of a 20-year-old Edgar Thomas, a black youth living in utter poverty in a poor area on Chicago's South Side in the 1930s. You see the education you get on my channel? That's why you should totally subscribe. Hint, hint, hint. Pap says that the writers he just named are for liberals and intellectuals, not the average reader who buys their magazine. The average reader isn't going to spend their hard-earned cash on something written by Negroes. Pap goes on to say, "Sorry, Benny, I wish things were different, but they're not." Benny pipes in quietly and angrily and says, "Wishing never changed a damn thing." Pap then says, "Come on, Benny, it's just a photo." Yeah, okay. On the surface, it's just a picture. A small little thing, but the small things eventually add up into one big thing and points to a larger injustice. And of course, this is not something that Paps understands, or if he does understand, he doesn't care. There are people in any struggle that will be on your side. There will be those who pretend to be on your side, but hold you back, which generally describes a certain breed of liberal in a lot of ways. It's exactly what Malcolm X warned against. The white liberal who pretends to be your friend, but in the end doesn't really support your cause and is trying to keep you back, saying, "Hold on, it's not time yet." And then there are those that are totally against you, and then people like Paps. He isn't actively hateful, but he isn't your friend either. At the very least, he isn't pretending to be. Things are what they are, and they will never change. He's just a small man working as an editor of a science fiction magazine. Keeping that running is his only concern. He doesn't aspire to higher-minded ideals. Benny, clearly still angry, just kind of lets the argument drop. Nobody else seems horribly happy with what they just witnessed, but nobody else speaks up either. Cut to Benny leaving the office at night. He drops the painting by accident and chases it down, only for it to be stopped by the foot of a police officer. The officer is played by Mark Alamo, who played the villainous Gul Dukat on the series, who at this point in the series was last seen having gone insane at the end of the Dominion takeover of the station arc. He too had an appearance on Quantum Leap, and specifically in the Black on White on Fire episode that I also covered on this channel. Next to him is another cop played by Jeffrey Combs, who has quite a storied career in B-movies and science fiction. He plays Wayoon on the series, the main Vorta character we see during the Dominion War, but he's another who didn't just play one role in the series. He also has Liquidator Brunt, which is Quark's nemesis. All told, he has appeared in 32 episodes of the series, 1 appearance on Star Trek Voyager, 11 episodes of Star Trek Enterprise, and 2 appearances on Star Trek Lower Decks. Incidentally, Casey Biggs, who portrayed Damar and was actually working with Wayoon at this point in the series, was set to appear sans makeup, but the actor was in New York and did not have time to make an appearance. He would later appear with the character of Benny Russell, sans makeup, in the second episode of the opening arc of Season 7, as a hallucination that was designed to confuse Sisko from completing his task in that episode. Officer Ryan, played by Mark Alamo, is questioning Benny about the drawing, asking him how do they know it's actually his, and generally acting like a racist butthead. Benny describes it, and Officer Mulcahy, I guess that's how it's pronounced, I don't know, that's just how he's credited, picks it up and looks at it. Ryan wants to bring him in anyway, but Mulcahy says they don't have time for that kind of shenanigans, so they let him off with a warning. Oh, how magnanimous of them. Just another piece of BS that Benny has to put up with in his life. Sisko is on his way home when he runs into a preacher who starts talking to him directly, and he's played by Brock Peters. The preacher tells him to write the words that will set them free. Benny goes home and does exactly that. He starts writing the tale of Benjamin Sisko and Deep Space Nine, He sees his reflection in the mirror and sees Cisco staring back at him. He continues to write, clearly inspired. The next day, Benny is walking with some kids who are singing, and he's singing along, clearly in a good mood. He's going to a restaurant, waitressed by Cassie, who we know as Cassidy Yates. He wants his eggs scrambled today. Whoa, Benny, slow down. Don't go all wild and crazy on me at once. He's excited because he just wrote the best story of his life. Cassie tells him that that's great, but then moves on quickly to news that the owner might be willing to sell the restaurant to them. Benny tells her annoyed. They've been over this. He has a job as a writer. Cassie is all over him, asking, well, how much money have you made doing that? We aren't getting any younger. It's time to think about our futures. In comes Willie Hawkins, a black baseball player who gets cheered as he enters, talking about the latest game. There's a quiet rivalry between Benny and Willie, and it's kind of friendly but kind of not at the same time. Who apparently has an eye for Cassie, but she only has eyes for Benny. Cassie ends up asking, how come you're still living around here when you could be living uptown? Willie points out that, nope, he can't. His teammates aren't even used to playing with him. Never mind living around him. Aside from that, the people around this part of the town look at him with adoration. Willie ends up going to hit on some women. His public awaits, he says. Willie Hawkins is loosely based on the baseball player Willie Mays. Mays played for the New York San Francisco Giants from 1951 to 1972, and 1 year with my team, the New York Mets, before retiring in 1973. Interesting to note that a Willie Mays baseball card was the subject of an episode of Deep Space Nine in the 5th season episode titled In the Cards, in which Jake was obsessed with getting his father that card. In comes Jimmy, played by Sirach Lofton. His performance as the troublemaking Jimmy is cliched, but surprisingly good at the same time. He's trying to sell Benny a probably stolen watch. Benny thinks Jimmy is due for a bad ending, and he's trying to get him to go legit. Jimmy tells him that Benny's life is no better, writing about a bunch of white people. Not anymore, Benny says. He's writing about them. Colored people on the moon, Jimmy laughs. Benny suggests he check out the next month's issue. Jimmy says he might just do that, but in the meantime, he needs to go commit crimes to make some money. That's not exactly what he says, but pretty much what he implies. It should be noted that Jimmy in this episode uses the N-word, and it is the one and only time an episode of Star Trek uses that word. Cut to the office where his coworkers, including Terry Farrell, as someone none of them really seem to know. She was recently hired as Pap's secretary. They are reading his story. Terry Farrell, who plays Dax in the show, would leave the show at the end of the 6th season, killed off because she wanted to be reduced to a part-time player. She would go on to star in a comedy show, Becker, with Ted Danson. Her role here is not particularly impressive. All of them think it's a great story. Kay briefly turns into Kira before going back to Kay. Caps comes in, less enthusiastic. Oh, it's very good, but he can't print it because his hero is a colored captain. People won't accept it. It's not believable. Herb pipes in once again, but Paps shuts him down. He tells Penny that he is a magazine editor, not a crusader. He's not there to change the world, just a man trying to run a magazine, which means he has a lot of people to answer to. And not one of those people is going to want to put the story out there, put that story out on the newsstands. For all they know, it might cause a race riot. Wow. Well, that is certainly an argument. Yeah, anyway, I think it's pretty moronic, and Herb agrees with me. He says that's the most ridiculous argument he's ever heard, going as far as to call Paps a coward. And yeah, Herb is not wrong. Kay sarcastically says that Herb is angry now. Paps makes some comment that Herb has been mad since Stalin died, pretty much implying that Herb is a communist. This angers Herb, and he almost goes after Paps, being held back by Benny of all people, who's the one who should probably be the angriest in this room, over Herb, for the record. Albert asks what Paps thought of his story, and Paps, of course, loved it. It had nothing to do with race issues. He just writes about robots. And Herb shoots an unnecessary insult at Albert, saying that's because he is one. Paps gets patronizing and suggests writing a novella based on the art he has in his hand. If he does a good job, he can even make the cover. But, he won't be pictured on that cover because he's black and all, Anyway, Benny asks, well, what about my story? And Paps says he can either burn it or stick it in a drawer. Either way, he can't publish it, unless, of course, they make the captain white. And Benny says emotionally, but that's not what I wrote. And Pap says, well, sue yourself, and then takes off. The trivia section of Internet Movie Database suggests that the argument Paps raises here is actually why the story would be published in the first place. That comment says, one of the most important qualities shared by both science fiction and animation is allowed things to pass, be it censors or public morals, approval, is the ability to suspend disbelief. Some of the most important stories were written and or filmed as such specifically for this reason. A notable example is Rod Serling, whose The Twilight Zone, 1959 series, was noted for its subtle yet strong commentary on society and its mores. That is an interesting take, and I'll offer up another example that the author of that didn't quite mention, and that's the original Star Trek series itself, which was also ahead of its time on these very topics. The next day, Cassie is in the restaurant and tells him that he's sorry that they didn't buy his story. Jimmy gloats, saying he told him so, that the only way they'll ever let them in space is that they need someone to shine their shoes. And asks, don't you agree, Cassie? But Cassie doesn't care. She doesn't care about things that happen 100 years from now. She only cares about today. And that's the difference between Cassie and Benny. Cassie is the realist. Cassie is the one in the moment. Whereas Benny is the dreamer. Jimmy says that today or 100 years from now, it doesn't make any difference. Benny says that things are going to change. They have to. But Benny honestly doesn't even sound like he believes it. I don't know if that's just Brooks' flat delivery of the line, or if that was the way the line was intended to sound like. Either way, it works, either as on purpose or by accident. Cassie suggests that maybe this is happening for a reason. And Benny is all like, you mean like the God's way of telling me that I should quit being a writer and run a restaurant? Cassie says that crazier things have happened. She suggests he can write part-time for the Amsterdam News, which by the way is a real newspaper, or was a real newspaper at the time. Benny points out that he's not a reporter, he's a writer, and the newspaper isn't going to publish his story. The conversation is interrupted by Dorn in full Klingon gear and makeup. Technically, this is an appearance by Worf, but not really. It scares the crap out of Benny, and he gets up. Dorn is back to being Willie. Benny makes a hasty retreat and makes plans for Cassie for 10. Well, dang, that's kind of late. Benny at night runs into the preacher, who wants him to walk with the prophets. Benny is getting frustrated with what sounds like nonsense, but then walks away while the preacher tells him to write the words. So he goes home and writes more Cisco stories. Cassie wakes him up as he forgot about their date. And again, I have to ask, why so late? Don't they have jobs in the morning? I mean, at least Benny does. They begin to dance, and he briefly finds himself on the station, talking to Cassidy. Benny is freaking out because he's beginning to see things from his story. The next day, Paps comes storming out of the office, asking if he's lost his mind. Benny says he's been asking himself that question a lot. And you know what, Benny? I can relate. I ask myself that question every single day. Paps goes on ranting, telling him he gave him a chance at the cover. Instead, he comes back with 6 stories, 6 sequels to a story he refused to publish in the first place. So, yep, Paps thinks he's totally lost his mind. Julia suggests self-publishing. Kay points out that you might as well write it in chalk on the sidewalk. More people would read it that way. Albert pipes in to say, what if they make the first story a dream? And Benny ends up asking, would that make a difference? Paps says, it depends. Who's doing the dreaming? And Kay says, someone dreaming of a better future. And Paps, catching on, says, a Negro. Herb argues that making it a dream guts the story. But Julius argues that it makes it more poignant. But what does Benny think? Benny quietly says that it's better than chalk on a sidewalk. Cut to Benny trying to play jump rope with a couple of young girls. I hope you know them, Benny. That's certainly not something that would fly this day and age. Jimmy is walking by, and Benny intercepts him. Jimmy looks preoccupied. He looks like he's into something not so good. Despite his best efforts, Jimmy goes off to whatever fate awaits him, which is probably not a good fate. Benny comes into the diner, excitedly telling Cassie that they are going to publish his story at 3 cents a word, which in today's world would be nothing. But back in the 1950s, that was probably a lot of money. Cassie is excited, and the two of them celebrate, while Willie looks on with a smile. Cut to what looks like dinner and dancing. Benny and Cassie looking all fancy when they run into the preacher. Benny tells him that he did it, that he wrote the story and it's getting published. But this time, the preacher is warning him that the path traveled will lead to darkness and pain. What a killjoy this preacher is. Unfortunately, he's proved right, as they hear the sounds of gunshots. Benny runs towards the source of it, which is definitely not something that I would do, but whatever. It's the cops we saw earlier having shot Jimmy, who was trying to break into a car. Benny freaks out and is beaten to a pulp for his trouble. We see flashes of Ducat and Wei-Un during the beatdown. We cut to what appears to be weeks later. Benny hasn't left the apartment, and Cassie is telling him he should go to the office. He's still not fully recovered, and probably never will be. Benny says that the new issue is going to be out, and Cassie says he deserves to see his work in print. Cassie suggests, as she grabs his cane for him, not to jump up and down with too much excitement. Somehow, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Benny limps into the office, and his coworkers come to see him, concerned and happy to see him. Benny asks if the new issue has arrived yet. He claims that he's okay. Well, he's alive anyway. Albert, meanwhile, has some news, that he has a book deal, which Benny is genuinely happy for. And wouldn't you know it, the book, of course, is about robots. Paps comes in looking extra grouchy. I mean, of course he's always like that, but he seems definitely extra so. Herb asks where the magazine is, and Paps says there isn't going to be one this month. Mr. Stone, the owner, had the entire run pulped. Benny quietly says he can't do that, and Paps disagrees, saying that Mr. Stone feels it didn't live up to the quality he expects. And Benny asks what that's supposed to mean. Paps sarcastically says it means he didn't like it. Benny, getting agitated, asks, and what exactly is it that he didn't like? The artwork? The layout? And he starts getting emotional. Kay tries to calm him down, but Benny gets to the heart of the matter. It's my story, isn't it? He didn't want to publish my story because his hero is a colored man. Paps yells, it's Mr. Stone's magazine, and if he says we don't publish this month, we don't publish this month. Benny angrily tells him it doesn't make it right, and he knows it. Paps returns his anger and says, don't tell me what I know. It's not about what's right or wrong. It's about what is. And wow, is that spoken like a true coward. He takes off his glasses and looks guilty for the first time. He tells him that Mr. Stone feels that Benny's services are no longer required. He's getting fired. His coworkers react with shock. Benny, finally after spending much of the episode calm, only occasionally getting emotional, finally loses it. He knocks everything off the desks with his cane, saying that they can't fire him, he quits, and then he fully melts down in a scene I couldn't possibly do justice. Some feel that Brooks overacted here. I personally feel that this is what a breakdown looks like. Yes, it's histrionic, it's ugly, but it feels true. After everything Benny has had to deal with on a day-to-day basis, from the small to the big, he finally can't take it anymore, and he completely melts down. His coworkers watch as he's carted away in an ambulance. Benny finds himself looking like Ben Sisko, dressed in his uniform. The preacher tells him he can rest easy. He walked the path of the prophets. There is no greater glory. Benny asks the preacher, please, tell me who I am. And the preacher asks, don't you know? You are the dreamer and the dream. And we see space at warp speed outside the window. We cut to a blurry shot of a tricorder. Cassidy gently says, Ben? And Sisko awakes, his father and his son at his side. Sisko asks, how long was he out? Bashir tells him it was only a few minutes, and his brain patterns have returned completely to normal, something he can't explain at all. Cut to Sisko's quarters. His dad enters, asking, how you feeling, son? And Sisko says he's okay. He wishes his dad could stay longer. But nope, his dad has a restaurant to run. The question is, what is Ben going to do? Ben says confidently that he's going to do the only thing he can do. Stay here and do the job he started. And if he fails, his dad briefly cuts him off, sounding like the preacher from Sisko's vision. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. Sisko is surprised, saying he never knew him to be, quote, the Bible. His father tells him that he is full of surprises, and so is his son. Sounds like that dream he had helped him sort things out. Cisco supposes it did, but he has begun to wonder, what if it wasn't a dream? What if this life that we are leading, all of this, you and me, everything, what if all of this is an illusion, says a television character. His father says that that's a scary thought, and it is, and one I've had many times. Cisco says maybe, just maybe, Benny isn't the dreamer, but we are. Maybe we are nothing more than the figments of his imagination. For all we know, at this very moment, somewhere beyond all the distant stars, Benny Russell is dreaming of us. Cisco looks out the window and sees Benny in his reflection. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the episode. I don't know how else to say this. This is an absolutely fantastic episode that tackles issues that are still relevant to this day. Great performances all around, some better than others. I'd say Brooks and Renee are the standouts here, though the rest definitely have their moments. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can join my Corman Productions Facebook page. You can follow me on Twitter at Core Productions. You can buy something from the Corman Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a coffee, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment in this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Corman Productions, signing off.